You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. At the same time, as I say every day, come on over to the chat room, the live chat room going on right now over on my YouTube channel where you can watch the video simulcast of this show. That's at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. All right, we're going to carry on with our series about the Native American point of view of the taming or the subjugation, you could say, of the American West, the conquering of the American West, the taking of lands that didn't belong to the United States under the terms of manifest destiny and eminent domain and things like that. And really, it's one of the blotches on American history. We have slavery that we all know about, but we also had the subjugation of the Native American peoples and the atrocities that we committed against them just to own their land. And yes, we were the more powerful people coming in. Yes, it was a conquering horde that came and washed over Native America. And that's the way I've seen some people describe the taking of the American West. Well, it was a conquest. Well, yeah, it was. Sure, it was a conquest, but at the same time, was it justifiable? No, it was not justifiable. The way we mistreated these people and what we did to them and the conditions they're still in today as a result of many of the treaties, well, all of the treaties, all of which were broken in one form or another, we have the situation we have today. And so we're going to continue on with this series from a slightly different angle. But the first thing I want to say today is don't abide fools. I get locked into abiding with fools sometimes. And I've been in conversations with people, and many times I stay in the conversations because I want to hopefully have a good discussion and find a good way to find either common ground or correct some notions or mistakes that I see out there. Not that I am the end-all and be-all of all measured stances on any given issue, but I think that there is more to be said, especially when there are political agendas behind issues. I had a long conversation yesterday with somebody about the slavery issue, and it ended up being just a fiasco, a nightmare. I told, not to me, the situation itself. I'm unoffended, I am unchanged, I am unmoved, but the situation became one where I finally said to this person, I said, look, why don't we go to a private conversation? We can hash this out. Why don't you give me a call? Here's my phone number. Now, I do that because my belief is that people in social media will take certain stances because they've got an audience. And my point was, let's go face-to-face, either Facebook Messenger, have a video chat or a phone call. Let's talk this thing out. Maybe we can find some common ground. Of course, that was being used now as I was harassing this person because apparently it was a young woman, which I didn't know at the time. It didn't matter. I was just having a discussion with somebody. And so that turned into a big blowout post on my wall because I posted some of the nasty things she said to me. Saying, look, here's another example of the way leftists tend to end conversations. And so suffice it to say, there are people that are out there that are intelligent, but not very bright. And there are people that will use anything they can to try to forward their personal agenda or their personal cause. This particular person wants to use the harassment thing with me, and it doesn't work. It falls flat. She was so harassed, as a matter of fact, she made at least 30 posts on my post. That's how harassed she felt. And pretty much degrading anybody else who came in there and said anything. So I want to say to you, advise you, if you're going to talk to people online, be prepared to know what you're talking about. Be prepared to have that person belittle you or degrade you, which were things that she said of me, that I was belittling and degrading and all that. Then it turned into a man versus woman thing, that I'm just a man and I'm 30 years older, and how dare I ask a woman to call me on the phone? And I said, you're not a child, are you? You're an adult? Can you handle a conversation on the phone if somebody offers it? So that kind of thing. So, excuse me. Ow. Sorry, that still hurts when I cough. All I'm saying is that some of you know of this situation already. Some of you have commented on the post. But don't abide fools. There's a point where there has to be a cutoff on this. And I am unabashed, unafraid. Oh, she reported me to Facebook, and Facebook didn't remove the post, so I'm pretty sure there's nothing wrong with what I said, because all I did was repost a public post, and I put the link in so people could go look it up. So when you run into these situations, which you may, if you debate people at all or discuss things, I don't know what else I want to say about that, other than that there are some pretty silly, pretty foolish people out there. And some people will say whatever it takes to forward their agenda, which is exactly what this person did. So if you want to see more about that, you can go over to my Facebook page and look it up. And that's all I'll say about that. Let's move on. Let's get into the material for tonight. We left off yesterday talking about Captain Jack, and talking about the end of Captain Jack and how that all came down, that whole situation. The war with the Modoc, how Captain Jack ended up being hanged because he fought a war, because he killed General Canby. And there was a war going on, but he got hanged. Some people might look at that as rightfully so. That's the price of being at war. I can see that point of view. At the same time, the Modoc were at war when all Captain Jack ever wanted, Kinpuash was his Native American name, all he ever wanted was peace, and his hand kept getting forced and forced and forced. And then the killing of his people, the massacres, and he was forced. His own people forced him into certain things. And so we saw how that worked, how that little bit of history can be retold from a different point of view. And today I want to talk about the war to save the buffalo. And you might not think much about this. You might know that the Native Americans, mostly the Plains Indians, followed the buffalo herds. This is how they fed their people. And this is what they were all along the way forbidden to do under these treaties. We wanted them to go farm and to raise livestock, and they were a hunter-gatherer people. And so let's look at this. In 1874, July 13th, unemployed workmen battle the police in New York City. And hundreds are injured. On February 13th, U.S. troops landed Honolulu to protect the king. What was his king? The king's name was... it's coming to me. I can't think of the king's name. It's a cool name, by the way. If I remember it, I'll blurt it out at some point during the show. On February 21st, Benjamin Disraeli becomes the English Prime Minister, replacing William E. Gladstone. March 15th, France resumes protectorate over Annam, or Vietnam. May 29th, Germany dissolves Social Democratic Party. On July, Alexander Graham Bell demonstrates his new invention, the electronic telephone. July 7th, Theodore Tilton accuses Reverend Henry Ward Beecher of adultery. November 4th, Samuel J. Tilden elected governor of New York after the overthrow of Tweed Ring. And December, the whiskey ring involving distillers and U.S. government officials is exposed. Those are some of the historical things that were going on in the world in the same time, in 1873. Now, I have a quote I'm going to read you here by Satanta, the chief of the Kiowa, and this is what he has to say. He said, "I've heard that you intend to settle us on a reservation near the mountains. I don't want to settle. I love to roam over the prairies. There I feel free and happy, but when we settle down, we grow pale and die. I have laid aside my lance, my bow, my shield, and yet I feel safe in your presence. I have told you the truth. I have no little lies hid about me, but I don't know how it is with the commissioners. Are they as clear as I am? A very long time ago this land belonged to our fathers. But when I go up to the river, I see camps of soldiers on its banks. These soldiers cut down my timber, they kill my buffalo, and when I see that, my heart feels like bursting. I feel sorry. Has the white man become a child that he should so recklessly kill and not eat? When the red men slay game, they do so that they may live and not starve." That was Satanta, chief of the Kiowa. And now there's a long quote from Parawasaman, who is 10 Bears, of the Yamparika Comanche. And this is what he had to say. This is a longer quote. He said, "My people have first drawn a bow or fired..." My people have never first drawn a bow or fired a gun against the whites. There has been trouble on the line between us, and my young men have danced the war dance, but it has not begun by us. It was you who sent out the first soldier, and we who sent out the second. 2 years ago I came upon this road, following the buffalo, that my wives and children might have their cheeks plump and their bodies warm, but the soldiers fired on us. And since that time there's been a noise like that of a thunderstorm, and we have not known which way to go. So it's been upon the Canadian, that's the river, nor have we been made to cry once alone. The blue-dressed soldiers and the Utes come from out of the night when it was dark and still, and for campfires they lit our lodges. Instead of hunting game, they killed my braves, and the warriors of the tribe cut short their hair for the dead. So it was in Texas they made sorrow come in our camps, and we went out like buffalo bulls when their cows are attacked. When we found them, we killed them, and their scalps hung in our lodges. The Comanche are not weak and blind, like the pups of a dog when 7 sleeps old. They are strong and far-sighted, like grown horses. We took the road, and we went on it. The white women cried, and our women laughed. But there are things which you have said to me which I do not like. They are not sweet like sugar, but bitter like gourds. You said that you wanted to put us upon a reservation, to build us houses and make us medicine lodges. I don't want them. I was born upon the prairie, where the wind blew free and there was nothing to break the light of the sun. I was born where there were no enclosures and where everything drew a free breath. I want to die there and not within walls. I know every stream and every wood between the Rio Grande and the Arkansas. I have hunted and lived over that country. I lived like my fathers before me. And like them, I lived happily. When I was at Washington, the great white father told me that all the Comanche land was ours, and that no one should hinder us in living upon it. So why do you ask us to leave the rivers and the sun and the wind and live in houses? Do not ask us to give up the buffalo for sheep. The young men have heard talk of this, and it has made them sad and angry. Do not speak of it more. If the Texans had kept out of my country, there might have been peace. But that which you now say we must live on is too small. The Texans have taken away the places where the grass grew the thickest and the timber was the best. Had we kept that, we might have done the things you ask. But it's too late. The white man has the country which we loved. and we only wish to wander on the prairie until we die. Again, that was Parawasaman, 10 Bears, of the Yamparaca Comanche. Now, after the Battle of the Washita in December of 1868, back a couple of years, General Sheridan ordered all Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Comanches to come into Fort Cobb and surrender, or face extinction by being hunted down and killed by his Bluecoat soldiers. Now remember, we talked about this. Sheridan's order and how they drove all the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Comanches into the reservation. Little Robe, who we've mentioned before, who succeeded the dead Black Kettle, remember Black Kettle, who had the American flag, that he could fly over his lodge, and he was told that he would never have to fear from the white man as long as he flew that flag, and yet when he and dozens of women and children stood under it, they were all slaughtered. Well, many of them were slaughtered. He survived that one. This is what we're talking about. That's Black Kettle. As chief, he brought in the Cheyenne. Yellow Bear brought in the Arapaho. A few Comanche leaders, notably Tosawi, who was told by Sheridan that the only good Indian was a dead Indian, also came to surrender. The proud and free Kiowas, however, gave no sign of cooperating, and Sheridan sent hard backsides Custer to force them to surrender or to destroy them. The Kiowas could see no reason for going to Fort Cobb, giving up their arms and living on white man's handouts. And the Treaty of Medicine Lodge, which Steve in our chat room has talked about a few times. They do a reenactment of that in his area every few years, which the chiefs had signed in 1867, gave them their own territory in which to live and the right to hunt on any lands south of the Arkansas River, so long as the buffalo may range thereon in such numbers as to justify the chase, was the promise that was made. And that was, you can find that in Indian Affairs, Laws, and Treaties, written by Charles J. Kepler. And so they promise him, as long as the buffalo exist, you have the right to hunt them down. So between the Arkansas River and the western tributaries of the Red River, the plains were black with thousands of buffalo driven down from the north by the white man's advancing civilization. The Kiowas were rich in fast-footed ponies, and when ammunition was scarce, they could use their arrows to kill enough animals to supply all their needs for food, clothing, and shelter. They used every bit of the buffalo that they killed. Nevertheless, long columns of Bluecoat pony soldiers came riding to the Kiowa winter camp on Rainy Mountain Creek. Not wanting a fight, Satanta and Lone Wolf, with an escort of warriors, went out to parley with Custer. Satanta was a burly giant with jet black hair reaching to his enormous shoulders. His arms and legs were thickly muscled, his open face revealing strong confidence in his power. He wore brilliant red paint on his face and body, and he carried red streamers on his lance. He liked to ride hard and fight hard. He was a hearty eater and drinker, and laughed with gusto. He enjoyed even his enemies. When he rode up to greet Custer, he was grinning with pleasure. He offered his hand, but Custer disdained to touch it. You know guys like that? I know these big gregarious types like that. This is what Satanta was like. Having been around the Kansas forts enough to know the prejudices of the white men, Satanta held his temper back when Custer refused his hand. He didn't want his people destroyed as Black Kettles had been. And the parley began coldly, with two interpreters attempting to translate the exchange of conversation. Realizing the interpreters knew fewer words of Kiowa than he knew of English, Satanta called up one of his warriors, Walking Bird, who had acquired a considerable vocabulary from the white teamsters. Walking Bird spoke proudly to Custer, but the soldier chief shook his head. He couldn't understand the Kiowa accent. Determined to make himself understood, Walking Bird went closer to Custer and began stroking his arm, as he had seen the soldiers stroke their ponies. "Heap big, nice sonabitch," he said. "Heap sonabitch." I do believe this is what he was calling Custer. Heap big sonabitch. You can find that in W.S. Nye's book Carbine and Lance, which was published in 1937 by the Norman University of Oklahoma Press. Now, when when Walking Bird said, "Heap big son of bitch," and stroked his arm, nobody laughed. The interpreters finally made Setanta and Lone Wolf understand that they must bring their Kiowa bands into Fort Cobb or face destruction by Custer's soldiers. Then, in violation of the truce, Custer suddenly ordered the chiefs and their escort party put under arrest. That's violating the truce. They would be taken to Fort Cobb and held as prisoners until their people joined them there. Setanta accepted the pronouncement calmly, but said he would have to send a messenger to summon his people to the fort. He sent his son back to the Kiowa villages, but instead of ordering his people to follow him to Fort Cobb, he warned them to flee westward to the buffalo country. Now, each night, as Custer's military column was marching back to Fort Cobb, a few of the arrested Kiowas managed to slip away. Setanta and Lone Wolf were too closely guarded to make their escapes. So by the time the Bluecoats reached the fort, these two chiefs were the only prisoners left. And angered by this, General Sheridan declared that Setanta and Lone Wolf be hanged unless all their people came into Fort Cobb and surrender. This was all under the truce. Hang 'em if the people don't come in. This was how, by guile and treachery, most of the Kiowa were forced to give up their freedom. Only one minor chief, Woman's Heart, fled with his people to the Staked Plains, and they were joined by their friends, the Quahati Comanche. And to keep close watch upon the Kiowas and the Comanches, the Army built a new soldier town a few miles north of the Red River boundary and called it Fort Sill. General Benjamin Grierson, a hero of the white man's Civil War, was in command of the troops, most of them being black soldiers of the 10th Cavalry, buffalo soldiers, the Indians called them, because of their color and their hair. So soon an agent with no hair on his head arrived from the east to teach them how to live by farming instead of hunting buffalo. This to me is like, what the hell is my response to that? We're going to teach you to not do what you've always done, and we're going to teach you why? Because they didn't want them free roaming the prairies. And his name was Lowry Tatum, but the Indians called him Baldhead. I think that's probably rather apropos. I'm going to see rather quickly, just because it's kind of cool to see this stuff. And of course, if you're listening on radio, you're not going to be able to see this image. And this is maybe the advantage to going over and taking a look. But I want to show you Setanta, this big, burly, gregarious Indian. I want to see if there's a good portrait of him here. He was one of those kind of guys. He was like a big biker guy, I think. When you think about it, this is the kind of man he was. He was a big man. He was gregarious. He loved life. And he loved... hold it, save the image. He loved humor and laughter. And yet, Custer didn't find him humorous at all. And let me pull this picture up so you can see this. I'm going to save it here. Sorry, I'm doing this on the fly. I would normally prepare these ahead of time, but since we're talking about him, and I realize I didn't pull a picture up of him, let's do it now. Let's call this Tanta. And this will give you a little visual about who we're talking about. Let's go here and grab it. There's Setanta. Boom. Okay, oh, it's a big image. Let me shrink that down so you can actually see it. Here he is. This is this big, barrel-chested, tall, muscular. Look at that face. Now, there's a man I would like to have known. What does that say? Oh, that's just some photographer's notes on there. That's Setanta. That's who we're talking about right now. Could you imagine being in his presence? He was a chief, and he was every bit the visual of a chief. And so he was a very interesting character. But this is the guy they're now. Sheridan said, if the Kiowas don't come in, hang him. While they were under truce. So there he is, Setanta. All right? Now, let's get back into this. So by guile and treachery, they brought all the Kiowas in. And there was only the one minor chief who refused to come in. And Woman's Heart fled with his people to the Staked Plains, where they joined their friends, the Comanches. Now, to keep close watch upon the Kiowa and the Comanche, the Army built this new fort. And the new person that was teaching them how to farm was Lowry Tatum. The Indians called him Baldhead. Now, General Sheridan came to the new fort, released Setanta and Lone Wolf from arrest, and held a council in which he scolded the chiefs for their past misdeeds and warned them to obey their agent. Whatever you tell me, Setanta replied, I mean to hold fast to. I'll pick it up and hold it close to my breast. It don't alter my opinion a particle if you take me by the hand now, or take and hang me. My opinion will be just the same. What you have told me today has opened my eyes, and my heart is open also. All this ground is yours to make the road for us to travel on. After this, I'm going to have the white man's road to plant corn and raise corn. You will not hear of the Kiowas killing any more whites. I am not telling you a lie now. This is the truth. And this is documented, by the way, in The Military Conquest of the Southern Plains, published in 1963, written by William H. Leckey, is where this quote of Setanta's comes from. Now, by corn planting time, 2,000 Kiowa and 2,500 Comanches were settled on the new reservation. And for the Comanches, there was something ironic in the government's forcing them to turn away from the buffalo hunting to farming. And we've got to stop there because I've overrun my time in the first segment. We'll be right back. Sit tight.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, we're back. Thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. You can also come over to my YouTube channel to see the video simulcast and join the live chat room going on right now with fellow Intrep heads. That's over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, we were talking about how under a truce, Setanta was arrested, and Sheridan ordered to have him hanged if the Kiowa didn't come into the fort. And this was how by guile and treachery, the Kiowas were forced to give up their freedom, and only one minor chief, Woman's Heart, fled with his people to the Staked Plains, where they joined their friends, the Cohati Comanche. And to keep close watch upon the Kiowas and the Comanches, the army built a new soldier town just a few miles north of the Red River boundary. They called it Fort Sill. Now, General Benjamin Grierson, a hero of the white man's Civil War, was in command of the troops, and most of them being black soldiers of the 10th Cavalry. Buffalo soldiers, the Indians called them, because of their skin color and their hair. And so soon an agent with no hair on his head arrived from the east to teach them how to live by farming instead of hunting buffalo, and his name was Lowry Tatum. But the Indians called him Baldhead. As now General Sheridan came to the new fort, he released Setanta and Lone Wolf from arrest, and he held a council in which he scolded the chiefs for their past misdeeds and warned them to obey their agent. Setanta replied to him, "Whatever you tell me, I mean to hold fast to. I will pick it up and hold it close to my breast. It don't alter my opinion a particle if you take me by the hand now or take and hang me. My opinion will be just the same. What you have told me today has opened my eyes, and my heart is open also. All this ground is yours to make the road for us to travel on. After this, I'm going to have the white man's road to plant corn and raise corn. You'll not hear of the Kiowas killing any more whites. I am not telling you a lie now, it's the truth." So by corn planting time, 2,000 Kiowas and 2,500 Comanches were settled on this new reservation. For the Comanches, there was something ironic in the government's forcing them to turn away from buffalo hunting to farming. The Comanches had developed an agricultural economy in Texas, but the white men had come there and seized their farmlands, forcing them to hunt buffalo again in order to survive. Now this kindly old man, Baldhead Tatum, was trying to tell them they should take the white man's road and go farming, as if the Indians knew nothing of growing corn. Was it not the Indian who first taught the white man how to plant corn and make it grow? For the Kiowas, it was a different matter. The warriors looked upon digging in the ground as women's work, and it was unworthy of mounted hunters. Besides, if they needed corn, they could trade pemmican and robes to the Wichitas for corn, as they'd always done. The Wichitas liked to grow corn, but they were too fat and lazy to hunt buffalo. So by midsummer, the Kiowas were complaining to Baldhead Tatum about the restrictions of farming. "I don't like corn," Setanta told him. I mean, that's as straightforward as it gets. "I don't like corn. It hurts my teeth." He was also tired of eating stringy longhorn beef, and he asked Tatum for an issue of arms and ammunition so the Kiowa could go on a buffalo hunt. So that autumn, the Kiowas and Comanches harvested about 4,000 bushels of corn. It didn't last long, distributed among 5,500 Indians and several thousand ponies. By springtime of 1870, the tribes were starving, and Baldhead Tatum gave them permission to go on a buffalo hunt. So in the summer of 1870, the Kiowas held a big sun dance on the North Fork of the Red River. They invited the Comanches and the Southern Cheyenne to come as guests, and during the ceremonies, many disillusioned warriors talked of staying out on the plains and living in plenty with buffalo instead of returning to the reservation for meager handouts. Ten Bears of the Comanches and Kicking Bird of the Kiowas spoke against this talk. They thought it best for the tribes to continue taking the white man's hand. The young Comanches didn't condemn Ten Bears. After all, he was too old for hunting and fighting. But the young Kiowas scorned Kicking Bird's counsel. He'd been a great warrior from before the white men penned him up on the reservation. Now he talked, as they said, like a woman. As soon as the dancing was finished, and by the way, that wasn't as much of an insult as you might think by 21st century standards. In the 19th century, amongst the Native Americans, women had roles and men had roles in their society. And they just said, he's talking like somebody who is a woman, who has a woman's role in our society. So as soon as the dancing was finished, many of the young men rode off to Texas to hunt buffalo and raid the Texans who had taken their land. They were especially angry against white hunters, who were coming down from Kansas to kill thousands of buffalo. The hunters took only the skins, leaving the bloody carcasses to rot on the plains. They didn't use any of the meat. They didn't feed anybody with it. They just took the pelts, or the skins. To the Kiowas and the Comanches, the white men seemed to hate everything in nature. "This country is old," Satanta had scolded Old Man of the Thunder, Hancock, when he met him at Fort Larned in 1867. "But you are cutting off the timber. Now the country is of no account at all." At Medicine Lodge Creek, he complained again to the peace commissioners. "A long time ago this land belonged to our fathers, but when I go up the river, I see camps of soldiers here on its banks. These soldiers cut down my timber, they kill my buffalo, and when I see that, my heart feels like bursting. I feel sorry." And this was recorded, of course, if I can call up my footnote here. This is recorded by the U.S. Bureau of American Ethnology, their annual report in 1895 to 1896. So, through that summer moon of 1870, the warriors who stayed on the reservation taunted Kicking Bird unmercifully for advocating farming instead of hunting. At last, Kicking Bird could bear no more. He organized a war party and invited his worst tormentors, Lone Wolf, White Horse, and Old Satank, to accompany him on a raid into Texas. Kicking Bird did not have the bulky, muscular body of Satanta. He was slight and sinewy and light-skinned. He may have been sensitive because he was not a full-blooded Kiowa. One of his grandfathers had been a Crow Indian. With 100 warriors at his back, Kicking Bird crossed the Red River, that boundary, and he deliberately captured a mail coach as a challenge to the soldiers at Fort Richardson, Texas. When the Bluecoats came out to fight, Kicking Bird displayed his skill in military tactics by engaging the soldiers in a frontal skirmish while he sent 2 pincer columns to strike his enemy's flanks and rear. After mauling the troopers for 8 hours under a broiling sun, Kicking Bird broke off the fight and led his warriors triumphantly back to the reservation. He had proved his right to his chieftaincy, but from that day he worked only for peace with the white man. By the coming of cold weather, and see, he made a point to his own people. "You want to keep belittling me for being a woman, for not doing the warrior and the man's job?" He says, "Let's go, I'll show you." He went and showed him, then he came back and said, "Now, we're done. I've made my point. I'm going to pursue only peace with the white man." So by the coming of the cold weather, many roving bands were back in their camps near Fort Sill. Several hundred young Kiowa and Comanche, however, remained on the plains that winter. General Grierson and Baldhead Tatum scolded the chiefs for raiding in Texas, but they could say nothing against the dried buffalo meat and robes which the hunters brought back to help see their families through another season of scanty government rations. So around the Kiowa campfires that winter, there was much talk about the white men who were pressing in from all four directions. Old Satonk was grieving for his son who had been killed that year by the Texans. Satonk had brought back his son's bones and placed them upon a raised platform inside a special teepee. And now he always spoke of his son as sleeping, not as dead. And every day he put food and water near the platform so that the boy might refresh himself on awakening. In the evenings the old man sat squinting into the campfires, his bony fingers stroking the gray strands of his mustache. He seemed to be waiting for something. Satanta moved restlessly about, and always talking, making proposals to other chiefs as to what they should do. From everywhere they heard rumors that the steel tracks for an iron horse were coming into their buffalo country. They knew that railroads had driven the buffalo from the Platte and the Smoky Hill. They could not permit a railroad through their buffalo country. Satanta wanted to talk to the officers at the fort and convince them that they should take the soldiers away and let the Kiowas live as they had always lived without a railroad to frighten the buffalo herds. Big Tree was more direct. He wanted to go to the fort some night and set the buildings on fire and then kill all the soldiers as they ran out. Old Satonk spoke against such talk. It would be a waste of words to talk to the officers, he said, and even if they killed all the soldiers at the fort, more would come to take their places. The white men were like coyotes. There were always more of them, no matter how many were killed. If the Kiowas wanted to drive the white men out of their country and save the buffalo, they should start on the settlers, who kept fencing the grass and building houses and making railroads and slaughtering all the wild game. So when spring came in 1871, General Grierson sent out patrols of his black soldiers, the buffalo soldiers, to guard the fords along the Red River. But the warriors were eager to see the buffalo again, and they slipped past the soldiers. Everywhere they went that summer on the Texas plains, they found more fences, more ranches, more white buffalo hunters with deadly long-range rifles slaughtering the diminishing herds. In the leaf moon of that spring of 1871, some Kiowa and Comanche chiefs took a large hunting party up the North Fork of the Red River, hoping to find buffalo without leaving the reservation. They found only a few, and most of the herds being far out in Texas. And around the evening campfires, they began talking again of how the white men, especially the Texans, were trying to drive all the Indians into the ground. Soon they would have an iron horse running across the prairie, and all the buffalo would disappear. Mamonte, the Skywalker, a great medicine man, suggested that it was time for them to go down to Texas and start driving the Texans into the ground. And they made preparations. And in mid-May of 1871, the war parley eluded Grierson's Grierson's patrols and splashed across the Red River into Texas. Satanta, Satonk, Big Tree, and many other war leaders were in the party, but the raid had been a vision of Mamonte, and therefore he was the leader. And on May 17th, Mamonte brought the warriors to a halt on a hill overlooking the Butterfield Trail between Forts Richardson and Belknap. There they waited through the night and until noon of the following day, when they saw an army ambulance escorted by mounted soldiers heading east along the trail. Some of the warriors wanted to attack, but Mamonte refused to give the signal. He assured them a much richer prize would soon follow, perhaps a wagon train filled with rifles and ammunition. Unknown to the Indians, the passenger in the army vehicle was none other than the great warrior Sherman, who was on an inspection tour of southwestern military posts. If they'd only known that. As Mamonti had predicted, a train of 10 freight wagons rolled into view a few hours later. At the proper moment, he motioned to Setanta, who was holding a bugle ready. Setanta blasted a call on the instrument, and the warriors swarmed down the slopes. The teamsters formed a corral and made a desperate stand, but the onrush of Kiowas and Comanches was far too much for them to resist. The warriors broke through the corral, killed 7 teamsters, and then let the others escape in a nearby thicket while they plundered the wagons. They found no rifles or ammunition, nothing but corn. How ironic is that? So they took the mules from the wagons, they fastened their wounded to horses, and rode north to the Red River. 5 days later, the great warrior Sherman arrived at Fort Sill. When General Grierson introduced him to Baldhead Tatum, Sherman asked the agent if any of his Kiowas or Comanches had been absent from the reservation during the past week. Tatum promised to inquire into the matter. Shortly afterwards, several of the chiefs arrived from their camps to draw weekly rations. Kicking Bird, Setonk, Big Tree, Lone Wolf, and Setanta were among them. Agent Tatum summoned them into his office. With his usual kindly solemnity, Tatum asked the chiefs if they'd heard of an attack on a wagon train down in Texas. If any of them knew anything about it, he said, he would like to hear them speak. Disregarding the fact that Mamonti had led the raid, Setanta immediately arose and said that he was the leader. Various reasons have been given as to why he did this. Was it vanity? Was he merely boasting? Or did he feel it was his duty as principal chief to assume all the responsibility? We're not quite sure about this. But he took the responsibility. At any rate, he used the opportunity to rebuke Tatum for the way the Indians were being treated. He said, Setanta said, "I have repeatedly asked you for arms and ammunition, which you have not furnished, and made many other requests which have not been granted. You do not listen to me talk. The white people are preparing to build a railroad through our country, which will not be permitted. Some years ago we were taken by the hair and pulled close to the Texans where we have to fight. When General Custer was here 2 or 3 years ago, he arrested me and kept me in confinement several days. But arresting Indians is played out now and is never to be repeated. On account of these grievances, I look, a short time ago, about 100 of my warriors, with the chiefs Setonk, Eagleheart, Big Tree, Big Bow, and Fast Bear, we went to Texas where we captured a train not far from Fort Richardson. If any other Indian comes here and claims the honor of leading the party, he will be lying to you, for I did it myself." So that's what Setanta had to say. And this is a quote of his, and it was written down by L. Tatum to E. Haug in their book. Now, Tatum remained outwardly unperturbed by Setanta's surprising speech. He told Setanta that he had no authority to issue arms and ammunition, but that the great warrior Sherman was visiting Fort Sill, and if the chiefs wished to petition Sherman for arms and ammunition, they were free to do so. So while the Kiowa chiefs were debating the advisability of a council with Sherman, Tatum sent a note to General Grierson, informing him that Setanta had admitted leading the raid on the wagon train and had named other chiefs who were present. Not long after Grierson received this message and passed it on to Sherman, Setanta arrived alone at the fort's headquarters asking to see the great soldier chief from Washington. Sherman stepped out on the wide porch, shook hands with Setanta, and told him he was summoning all the chiefs for a council. Most of the summoned chiefs came in voluntarily to this council, but the soldiers had to force old Setonk to attend. Big Tree tried to run away, but he was caught. Eagleheart fled when he saw soldiers arresting the others. So as soon as the chiefs were assembled on the porch, Sherman told them that he was arresting Setanta, Setonk, and Big Tree for murdering civilian teamsters in Texas. Furthermore, his soldiers would return them to Texas for trial by court of law. Now, we all know how trials of Indians went. Setanta flung his blanket back and reached for his pistol, shouting in Kiowa that he would rather die than be taken as a prisoner to Texas. Sherman calmly gave a command, the shutters on the porch windows all flew open, and a dozen carbines were leveled at the chiefs. The headquarters officer was filled with black troopers of the 10th Cavalry. Now, Kicking Bird rose up at this point to protest. "You have asked for these men only to kill them," he said. "But they are my people. I'm not going to let you have them. You and I are going to die right here." Now, about this time, a troop of mounted cavalry arrived on the scene. Now, by the way, I like to give some of these footnotes because I think it's important to know that some of these quotes that you're hearing here, these are actual quotes, and this was in Nye's book as well. He says, "You've called all these chiefs here only to kill them. So I want to prevent that. I'm not going to let you do that. You and I are going to both die here right now." And then this troop of mounted cavalry arrived on the scene, and as they took positions along a picket a picket fence facing the porch, Lone Wolf rode up. Ignoring the soldiers, he dismounted casually, tied his pony to the fence facing the porch, and he placed his two repeating carbines on the ground. And he stood there for a moment, tightening his pistol belt, his eyes alert, an expression of amused contempt on his face. When he picked up his weapons and strode toward the porch, he reached the steps, he handed his pistol to the nearest chief and said loudly in Kiowa, "Make it smoke if anything happens." He tossed a carbine to another chief, and then sat down on the porch floor, cocking his remaining weapon and staring imprudently at the great warrior Sherman. See the defiance here? An officer called an order, and the cavalrymen brought their carbines to firing positions, hammers drawn. Setanta threw up his hands. "No, no, no!" he shouted. Sherman calmly ordered the soldiers to lower their arms. It was June 8th in the summer moon when the soldiers loaded the three chiefs into wagons for the long ride to Fort Richardson. Handcuffed and hobbled with chains, Setanta and Big Tree were shoved into one wagon and Setonk into another. As the wagons rolled out of the fort with their cavalry escorts, old Setonk began singing the death song of his Kiowa soldier society. And I wish I could sing this in their language. He says, "O sun, you remain forever, but we Kaitsenko must die. O earth, you remain forever, but we Kaitsenko must die." And this was the U.S. Bureau of American Ethnology in their annual report, the 17th, in 1895 to 96, where this was recorded some 20 years later. He pointed to a tree where the road turned to cross a stream. "I shall never go beyond that tree." He shouted in Kiowa and pulled his blanket over his head. Beneath the blanket, he tore flesh from his hands as he freed them from the manacles. He drew a concealed knife from his clothing. With a cry of desperation, he leapt for the nearest guard, stabbing him and throwing him from the wagon. An instant later, he seized a carbine from one of the other startled guards. Outside, a lieutenant shouted a command to fire. A volley cut down the old Kiowa. The wagons had to be halted for an hour, while the soldiers waited for Setonk to die. Then they tossed his body into a ditch beside the road and resumed their journey to Texas. The trial of Setanta and Big Tree for murder began on July 5, 1871 in the courthouse in Jacksboro, Texas. A jury of ranchers and cowboys, wearing pistols in their belts, listened to 3 days of testimony, and promptly returned a verdict of guilty, of course. The judge, pardon me, folks, the judge sentenced the prisoners to be hanged. The governor of Texas, however, took heed of warnings that their executions might arouse the Kiowas to war, and he commuted the sentences to life imprisonment in the Huntsville Penitentiary. Now, the Kiowas had lost their 3 strongest leaders. During the autumn, many young men slipped away in small parties to join the Indians who lived the old free life by keeping to the staked plains. Avoiding white hunters and settlers, they followed buffalo herds between the Red and the Canadian rivers. And with the coming of the geese-going moon, they made winter camps in Palo de Oro Canyon, and the Kahati Comanches dominated this group of Indians, but they welcomed the growing numbers of Kiowa who came to join them. Lone Wolf had hunted with the Kiowatis, and must have been given some thought to joining them, but in his early months of 1872, he was engaged in this struggle with Kicking Bird over which direction the reservation Kiowas should be taking. Kicking Bird and Stumbling Bear, and great names, I love them, Kicking Bird and Stumbling Bear, advocated following the white man's way, even though it meant abandoning the buffalo hunts in Texas. Lone Wolf opposed such talk, and the Kiowas could not live without their buffalo hunts. If the white men stubbornly insisted that the Indians must hunt within the reservation, he said, then the reservation must be extended to the Rio Grande on the south and the Missouri on the north. And that's where we got to stop for tonight, folks. There's a lot more to this. So join us again tomorrow night. We're going to talk more about the war on the buffalo as part of the diminishing Native Americans' claims to their land to hunt for food and clothing. So thanks for being here. 23-hour break. We'll see you right back here. Sit tight.